music in the elevator is an old jazz standard played on clarinet. It sounds like it was recorded inside a tin can. When gravity stops trying to push me into my shoes, the doors roll open. I tug on my necktie, but it's as tight as it will go. I step out trailing rainwater from my coat and hat, leaving wet footprints on the carpet. The foyer is something. It's like the front of a countryside mansion, yet somehow still looks right at home here, 300 stories above the streets of Amber City. The only element I find unforgivably garish are the wooden double doors. They belong in a castle, not in a skyscraper. Emblazoned across the wood in gold is the word Harland. The doors swing open, splitting Harland between the R and the L. Out steps a straight-backed little man with white hair, dressed in a perfectly pressed tuxedo with peaked lapels.
"Mr. Tarelli, I presume,"
says the little man. His voice echoing through the hall sounds like an opera singer. "That's me," I say. My voice echoes too, but more like rusted gears than an opera. He takes my coat and hat with a professional flourish.
"Mr. Harland is expecting you in the observatory,"
he says. "I didn't catch your name," I say.
"Hennessy, sir."
"You smoke, Hennessy?"
"No. Right this way, sir."
Following Hennessy over the threshold, I find myself in the kind of place I've only ever seen in old films. It's a massive main hall with overhanging balconies, black marble floors, and accents of onyx. The doorways are flanked by larger-than-life white busts of figures from mythology and religion. My face is probably priceless as Hennessy leads me to a wide center stairway with ornately carved banisters. The hallway at the top has carpet the color of blood, and I pass beneath the painted gazes of a dozen giant portraits of men and women I feel like I should know. Hennessy opens another set of doors leading into a very dark room. He steps to the side. He does not go in.
"Just through here, Mr. Tarelli,"
Hennessy prods. I reach up to tip my hat, forgetting that he's holding it. When my hand touches the bald scalp, I tug on my earlobe and nod to him as I enter. The doors shut behind me with a boom. I stand still for a second, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The room is every bit as big as the grand hall, but lacks any of the classical style. No pomp here. The only furnishings are a small dining table and chairs. The far wall is transparent, a single giant window with Amber City laid out before and below like a sprawling moving picture, blurred by the buckets of rain snaking over the glass. The sun has just gone down, and the black clouds hang over the skyline, sparking with silent horizontal lightning.
"I trust you found the place all right,"
squeaks a voice. The skeletal framework of a balcony runs along the midsection of the window wall, connected to the floor by a switchbacking ramp. At the center of the balcony, a man sits in a chair. "Hard to miss," I say. The man gestures toward the dining table.
"Please, help yourself."
On the table, I find one bottle, one glass, and a wooden box of long cigars. I only sniff the cigars, but I pour myself a drink and take a sip. It's got the uncommon aftertaste I've come to associate with good, expensive scotch. I drain the glass in a few sweet gulps, then refill it, thus aborting yet another honest attempt to quit drinking. Can't blame me. It's not every day a guy gets a free sip from the top shelf. And it's not every day a guy gets called on to visit with Rutherford Harland in person either. Yet here I am, a stranger invited into his personal home, just hours after the murder of his only son. One last try at tightening my tie, and I approach the window wall. I ascend the ramp with footfalls that clank and ring through the room. For the life of me, I don't know how someone could stand to live in a place that echoes so much. Then I'm at the top, with him. Some colorless hair still clings for dear life to the back of his head, and a thin mustache droops from his upper lip. He'd be taller than me, standing, but it's been a long time since he's done that. Slumped in the metal frame of a wheelchair, a woolen blanket over his lap, Rutherford Harland casts an unassuming figure for one of the most powerful men on the planet. He turns his gaze away from the city to study me with brown, red-rimmed eyes.
"Mr. Tarelli," he says, "a pleasure."
"Likewise, Mr. Harland," I say. "Beautiful place you've got here."
"I'm glad you think so. Rarely do I get a chance to entertain guests. Isn't the view marvelous?"
"It's very lovely. It's more than that. Not even from an airship viewport have I ever seen Amber City quite like this. Through the haze of the rain, the city is rolled out before me like a living map. The skyscrapers are radiant towers, the streets are rivers of flowing light, and the headlamps of the gridlocked airships hovering along in their exact geometric paths high above the streets create spiderwebbing synthetic constellations.
"Dreadful night," Harlan says. "Is the rain very cold?"
"A little. Nothing a stiff drink can't cure."
"I despise the rain," Harlan says. "I was born and raised on Jannix, and I was almost middle-aged by the time I had the means to do any real traveling. It wasn't until then that I realized there are places in the star system where it doesn't constantly rain. It's not normal. Had I learned that at a younger age, I may never have stayed here."
"When you're right, I say. It does rain too much."
He makes a noise in his throat.
I can feel myself squirming, and I hope he doesn't notice. "About your son, Mr. Harland," I say. "For what it's worth, I'd like to offer my condolences." Harlan turns back to stare out into the night again, hands folded in his lap.
"Thank you,"
he says. "After what feels like a long time," he says.
"How old are you, Jack? 60?
58, I say. But who's counting?
Who's counting, indeed. Everyone who has ever lived has died. We all still think ourselves immortal. We always think we are the exception. These days, every time that sun sets, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever see it again."
I slurp down the last of my drink, lean against the railing, and look out at the city. It feels like I'm hanging over a precipice. The last of the brown dwarf sun's light has faded away completely, leaving a black canvas dotted with a billion pinpricks of white light. Harlan's not alone in his anxieties. Night falls hard on Jannix. With a synodic day of 16 standard days, night lasts 145 hours here. We go almost an entire week without sunlight. It's enough to make any man wonder if he'll see another dawn.
"Help yourself to another glass,"
Harlan says. "I'd better not."
"Come now, you're young."
A little chuckle escapes my lips. Been a long time since anyone called me young.
"All a matter of perspective, Jack. Take my son, one moment the pride of the Harlan family name, on the cusp of inheriting my empire. The next, dead on some factory floor in East Amber. You know why I asked you here tonight?"
My lips are dry, and I wish I'd left something in my glass to wet them. "You want me to find out who killed your son?" Harlan's reflection against the window is like the face that looks back at you from a puddle in the street. His hands aren't folded in his lap anymore. They're clutching the arms of his wheelchair like talons. His knobby knuckles are white. I clear my throat. With all due respect, Mr. Harland, we've never met. I don't know how comfortable I'd be taking a client I don't.
You know who I am, and I've done my homework on you. That'll be enough.
Maybe, but you don't know my methods.
Jack, I have a personal security force on call, and I could hire every private investigator in the city if it pleased me. I need you because I have reason to believe the mob was involved in my son's death. They've been trying to take me down for years. To get at Nathan like this, it's possible they've infiltrated my business. Nobody associated with my companies can be trusted. And as for the police, he laughs. They're even worse.
After swallowing, I manage. Not all cops are like that.
Enough of them are. I need somebody who won't cave under pressure. Somebody who's gone up against the mob before.
I feel my nostrils flare. You know about that, huh? Well, then you know I lost.
And I know you've taken too many falls to be a man easily bought. We're kindred spirits, you and I.
Those days are long gone. But if you need a good private eye, I can give you some names. Guys who are smarter than me, smoother, too. Me, I've got a temper. I strong-arm too much. Sometimes I drink too much, too.
And sometimes you're too honest. In my book, that's the perfect man for finding the truth.
My teeth are grinding. I wish I weren't such a glutton for punishment. I work alone, I hear myself say.
You will,
responds Harland.
And you'll be compensated handsomely.
I never doubted that. I look him in the eye, and I sigh. You're a tough one to read, you know that? You must be good at cards.
Dreadful, says Harland, without cracking a smile.
Too headstrong to bluff. He extends a bony, long-fingered hand in my direction. I grip it gently, and we shake. His skin is cold and soft. 2. Hennessy is there to meet me outside of the observatory. As the door swings shut behind me, I catch one last glimpse of Rutherford Harland on his balcony, looking out at the city. I'm still in shock over what I've just gotten myself into. A bum like me, suddenly under the employ of a man who probably makes more money in a day than I've seen in my entire life. My coat and hat? I ask, because Hennessy's hands are empty.
Mrs. Reed would like a word.
Mrs. who?
Mrs. Reed.
I meant, who is she?
Mr. Harland's daughter. She awaits you in the library.
There wouldn't happen to be any more of that scotch in the library.
I shall arrange it, sir, if you'll follow me.
As Hennessy leads me up an adjoining staircase and beneath more portrait cases, I am trying to remember current affairs. This all happened so quickly, I didn't have much time in the way of research. I know from the papers that Rutherford has a daughter, a regular face at charity events and high society functions. Beyond that, I don't know much about her. Never thought I'd need to. I can't help but wonder how Rutherford Harland even found me. In 10 years as a private detective, I've never advertised once. Word-of-mouth business exclusively. Mostly small cases, just enough to eat and keep the lights on. The murder of a business magnate like Nathan Harland, son of a legendary industrialist like Rutherford Harland, whose reputation approaches mythology. This kind of thing isn't exactly in my wheelhouse. It's been a long time since I worked a murder case, let alone anything of this magnitude. Hennessy leads me to another high-ceilinged room with the doors wide open. There are big windows here, too, but the curtains are all drawn. Every wall is packed to the ceiling with shelves upon shelves of leather-bound books. About as many books as a man could hope to read in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers hang from the ceiling, and the walls glow from panels of recessed lighting. Standing atop a brass stepladder on rollers, licking her finger to flip through the pages of a book, is a dark-haired woman, mid-30s, with lean calves peeking out from beneath a long skirt. Behind me, Hennessy announces,
"Mr. Jack Tarelli to see you, Mrs. Reed." "Of course," she says. "Leave us." "Very good, madam. And how do you take your scotch, sir?"
"In a glass," I answer. "No ice." As Hennessy hustles off in that straight-backed march of his, Mrs. Reed starts down the ladder. "Your family seems to like high places," I say. I reach up to remove my hat, finding it missing again, and instead just scratch my head. "I'm afraid I didn't know your drink, Miss..."
"Mrs. Reed," she says. "But Yvonne will do. Hennessy knows my drink. You are a brute of a man, Mr. Tarelli."
She's got a singer's voice, pleasant and husky. In a move that surprises me, she hops off the ladder still 3 rungs up, and her heels clack against the hardwood floor as she sticks the landing on sure feet. Her blouse is open at the top, showing her collarbones. Eyes like her father's, yet somehow entirely different. Fair skin, red lips, upturned in a sly grin. Expensive makeup, a little much for my tastes, but a lot of men like that. Her dark hair rests on her shoulders, and I wonder what it feels like. "He's very lifelike," I say. Her grin doesn't falter, but I can tell it catches her off guard.
"What do you mean?"
"Hennessy. Practically human in every way." She tilts her head a little.
"What gave him away?"
"Well, he's not much for small talk," I say, and I leave it at that. It's true he's no conversationalist, but what really gave Hennessy away were his eyes. No matter how nearly perfect the simulation, skin, hair, vocal nuances, personality traits, you can always tell a bot by the eyes. They can be made to look quite real. Even the algorithm that controls their blinking is flawless, attuned to biological standards and automatically adjusting to conditions like light and humidity. The same goes for the pupil dilation. What gives it all away is eye contact. Eye contact is just too natural in humans to be successfully simulated in bots. It's controlled by situational cues, prior individual experience, anxiety, awkwardness, the sorts of things machines don't have or feel. And unlike us, their peripheral vision is perfect. They don't need to look directly at something to see it clearly, as a biological eye does. Poor emulation causes bots to either roam the room with their eyes, seemingly at random, or never break eye contact at all.
"As you can imagine, it's difficult for my father to trust hired help,"
says Yvonne Reed, placing special disdain on the word hired.
"Bots are more trustworthy, 100% loyal."
A knife is loyal too, I say, but you can still cut yourself with one. With perfectly rhythmic footfalls, Hennessy re-enters the library with a silver platter, carrying a short tumbler for me and a tall skinny glass of something for Brown Eyes, packed with ice. He stops before us and offers the platter without a word. Yvonne takes her drink, and I take mine. Hennessy stares straight at me, but his eyes seem empty, like he's seeing through me. Hennessy turns to Yvonne.
"Will there be anything else, madam?" "Not right now," she says.
Hennessy bows and exits with the empty platter tucked under his arm, and as the bot's footfalls fade away down the hall, Yvonne Reed and I touch glasses and drink. "Is it just the 3, then?" I ask. "Living in this big place?" Yvonne sighs, and her eyes take a tour of the library.
"It's a rather dreary old haunt these days, isn't it? Once upon a time, it was full of life and laughter. People were in and out all the time, visiting with my father, conducting business, you know. These days he's too old and paranoid for socializing.
Maybe he's got it right. Look at what happened to your brother. Seeing the look on her face, I stop and clear my throat. My condolences.
Mentioned Nathan, did he?
He hardly needed to. It's all over the news. My glass is empty all of a sudden, so I set it down on a nearby end table. Were you two close?
No, not very. Nathan is, or was, rather, nearly as old as my biological mother was. We had the same father, but little else in common. Do you know very much about my father?
Oh, the usual. Self-made man. Climbed the ladder from the factory floor to the executive's office. Started his own company and never looked back. Hands in all manner of business across Jannix. Owns a stockyard on the Invictus Moon, if memory serves. Occasionally married. 2 children. Am I going too fast for you, Mrs. Reed? She tilts her frame to one side, cocking her head slightly to look at me.
Why so interested in my family, Mr. Tarelli?
Well, I'm not, if I'm being honest.
Oh?
It's called small talk, Mrs. Reed. It's what you do while you're waiting for the other person to work up the courage to come out with whatever it is they really want to say. You're the one who called me in here. It wasn't just for a nightcap, was it? If it was, my glass is empty, so I'll bid you a fond farewell. I'm too busy a man to stand around jawing like this. One of her dark eyebrows rises in an appraising sort of way.
I'm not accustomed to being spoken to like that.
I'm sure you aren't.
You can't blame a girl for being curious,
she says.
Nathan's dead, and Father suddenly starts taking house guests. Just wondering what's so special about you, is all.
You'll let me know if you figure it out. Say, if we're going to go around in circles like this all night, would you mind at least putting on some music?
I won't keep you, Mr. Tarelli. I mean well by my inquisition. I feel a certain responsibility to watch over my father in his old age. And all the more now that Nathan is gone.
Is that why a married woman at your age is still living with her father? Her jaw tightens and her eyes smolder. Her skirt spins in a wide arc as she turns away. With slow, measured grace, she walks back the way she came. Please thank your father for the drinks, I call after her. She says nothing. Hennessy's waiting for me in the hall, this time with my coat and hat. 3. I'm thinking about the intricate spider-webbing constellations of airship traffic visible from Rutherford Holland's observatory and wondering where I am right now in that marvelous view. And I wonder if at this very moment those brown, red-rimmed eyes are watching me. The cab driver is cursing the congested boulevards of the skies in a sharp foreign tongue. Based on his accent and the twanging, quick-stepping music he's got playing in here, I'd say he's fresh off the boat from the Uluru colonies up north. I'm in the back seat, thumbing through a wad of cash every bit as handsome as Rutherford Harland promised, and thinking. Despite Harland's distrust of cops, he must still have some sort of pull within the Amber City PD. He's made arrangements for me to visit the scene of the crime, 105th Street in East Amber. But before that, I've decided to make a quick stop of my own. It's a little early to stray off the beaten path, I know, but I like to do things my way. Detective work is, after all, in my blood. Dad worked Amber PD Homicide Division just like his father before him. I made it there too, after a slight detour. When I enlisted with the Jannix Interstellar Navy at 17, it was mostly out of wanderlust. I knew what awaited me here. I had seen it in my father's face every morning when I was just getting out of bed and he was just dragging himself home from work. I wanted to spend a couple of years seeing the star system before settling down into that life. Given my family history and Dad's good standing in the department, I knew there would be a job waiting for me when I came home. Things might have even gone the way I'd planned, if not for the insurrections on Antioch. A year after I enlisted, I was called up into the Democratic Trade Coalition's allied military forces and sent half a solar system away as a part of the initiative to ensure interplanetary peace, which, it turned out, meant making war. I made a name for myself in battle. When I demonstrated a knack for tactics, I was made a combat controller. A few years passed, and I was made an officer. And a few years passed after that. Funny how time goes by. I saw a lot of death in that war. Caused a fair share of it, too. Too many good men are still buried in those gray sands. The war went on long enough for a few more promotions. The enemy was never really defeated, but eventually the worst of the fighting stopped. I came home to Jannix, a retired second lieutenant. By then, Dad had passed away, but I still wanted to make him proud. I joined the Amber PD. My war hero status and family legacy got me a spot in the homicide division, and I quickly made detective. One of the first things you learn working homicide is that time is the enemy. The first 24 hours after a murder are a precious, precious thing. The trail goes cold, along with the body. You've got to use wisely what little time you have. You learn how to survive on nothing but black coffee, bad sandwiches, and a little booze to take the edge off. Even in the war, I never understood what had made my dad such a bitter, hateful old drunk. But the nice thing about war, the blood and brutality serve a purpose. When you see it firsthand in battle, well, you can sigh and regret the war and lament what terrible things it pushes humans to do. Homicide, though, that's a different story. When you see travesties and perversions committed on an hourly basis amid the day-to-day existence of this city where there is no war, no possible justification, well, the human condition is what you lament. And you start to hate the kind of world where people do these things to one another. There are many reasons I wish Dad had still been alive when I made detective. But mostly, it's because only after I started doing his job, started seeing the things he used to see, only then was I finally able to understand my father as a person, as a man. All too late. It's like Rutherford Harlan said, all a matter of perspective. I sit in the back seat of the taxicab watching the lights of the city fly by. 2 years from 60 is too old for the average Joe to still be doing this kind of work, especially alone. But I'm not your average Joe. I have no family. I have few friends. I have only one thing, a case, from a long time ago that still needs solving. A case for which I must be prepared, in mind and muscle. I work these private jobs to stay sharp. I spend my free time honing my body. I burn up my money on nutrition, supplements, and genetic enhancements to stave off the effects of age and keep me strong. Because when the day finally comes, I can't afford to be too old or too weak to get the job done. I live hell-bent toward a singular purpose, one that I understand on a certain level will probably never be fulfilled. It's a bad life I'm living, but it's mine, and it's now, and it's all I've got left. The cabbie's jubilant, foreign-tongued exclamation snaps me back to reality. The traffic is clearing up. With the hum of the anti-gravity engines, the taxi hovers along, slipping down beneath the city lights visible from Rutherford Harlan's observatory, and into the shadows they cast.
4. Anyone ever tell you drink too much, Tarelli?
Just once. He drank his meals after that. The bearded 20-something kid across the table laughs. The neon monkey is clouded with smoke tinted blue and swirling invisible currents. On stage, the house band is deep into a mellow set. He goes by the name of Fox, and he's young enough to be my son. He's covered in tattoos and dresses like a gang member, but that's just an act. In reality, He's one of the best connected brokers of information in all of Amber City. I've placed his customary fee on the table. A drink to open his mouth, and a couple hundred credits to get him to say something worthwhile.
I don't buy it, says Fox. Nobody sees Rutherford Harland.
I did, I say.
Old man must be getting senile.
He probably is, a little.
I was talking about you.
I reach across the table to take back my money, but Fox is quicker, snatching the bills up between his fingers and rolling them into a little paper tube. I lower my hand and close it into a fist on the tabletop. He takes a drink.
Rutherford Harland, says Fox. We talking about the same guy? The shipping industrialist? The richest man in Amber? One of the richest on the planet? $10 billion in property values within the city limits alone. Net worth...
The same, I cut in. And the same one whose son was found dead on a factory floor a few hours ago. What do you know about that? Fox cocks an eyebrow.
You got some angle here, Jack.
You've got this backward. I pay you to talk. Fox smiles.
I might have something juicy.
Go on and impress me.
Nathan Harland's always been high up in his dad's companies, but in recent years, he's kind of kept his distance from the old man, working mostly off-planet. Whether for business reasons or something personal, I don't know. But then, all of a sudden, Nathan moves back home to Jannix and starts living with Rutherford at his mansion. Until recently.
He punctuates this thought with an impious slashing motion across his throat and a lolling of the tongue. You're practically reciting his obit, I say. Give me something I can use. I'm bluffing. I didn't know Nathan had been living at home with Rutherford and Yvonne. If I had, the first place I'd have gone would have been whatever room he'd been staying in. If Rutherford just forgot to mention this fact, that's okay. But if he intentionally left it out, lied by omission, then I'm going to have a problem. Fox takes another drink, swishes it around in his mouth, savors it, takes his sweet time just to get on my nerves. I wonder if he realizes most working folks don't sit in bars all day and night.
Here's the thing, says Fox. A large sum of money changed hands on Invictus about a month ago in exchange for several blocks of the condemned factory district in East Amber. At the time, it piqued the interest of some of my clients, so I did some digging. What's funny about it is no record of the transaction exists. So I get my hands on the documents, and guess what I find? The buildings are still all listed as condemned. They belonged to the city of Amber until recently. But now, they belong to somebody named Royal Evening.
And no bill of sale?
None. One day the records say one thing, the next something else.
Royal Evening. Some sort of corporation?
It's listed as an individual.
Sounds like a front.
That's what I thought. So I dig some more, and I find a possible match. A decommissioned starship by the same name. The Royal Evening was a luxury space liner that was retired and melted down for scrap about 15 years ago. And the owner of the Evening? Surprise, surprise, Nathan Harland. Like I said, bank records indicated that some big money changed hands on Invictus around the same time the properties came under new ownership. There's no data trail to connect the two, but you do the math.
And Nathan Harland also happened to be working on Invictus at the time, didn't he? I say. The property purchase could explain why he moved home. There was a new investment he had to keep an eye on.
You haven't even heard the kicker, says Fox. Ready for this? The properties in question, 25 square blocks worth of real estate, located between 99th and 106th in East Amber.
East Amber, 105th Street. The factory where Nathan Harland was found dead. I flag down a waitress, pay for my drinks, and tip her. I stand from the table and adjust my hat. "I'll be in touch, Fox." Fox chuckles. Guys and gals in his vocation have no names or numbers to keep in touch with. They exist only in the back sections of bars like the Neon Monkey, and only when they want to. 5. Fox's information is not all news to me. I had inklings of some of it, but I see now that the connections are even more black and white than I suspected. I also knew the scene of the crime was a factory, but I did not know it was a condemned one. That raises even more questions as I hail a cab and tell the driver to head to 105th. Perhaps visiting the scene of the crime conjures images of dusting for fingerprints, scanning for biological material, or taking blood samples to run DNA database queries. If only things were still so simple. There was once any number of means to scientifically divine the identity of a suspect. When the Coalition's system-wide citizen database contained the full DNA profile of every human being born in a hospital for the past 300 years, solving a crime was as easy as finding a hair or a flake of skin. If human DNA wasn't present in a homicide investigation, there were other options. You could scan for cross-transfers of bacteria and match the bacteria's DNA instead. Or match a strand of virus found on the victim with antibodies to that virus present in the perp's bloodstream. I've read cases of murders that occurred in closed rooms, where chemical compounds secreted from the killer's sweat glands hung in the air long enough to be collected, and the amino acids in the proteins were reverse translated into DNA. If you had dandruff and BO, a life of crime was an ill-advised career choice. It all sounds very exciting, which is why the myths of super science crime fighting are still perpetuated in popular culture. Police in the movies are always in lab coats, working over fancy equipment late into the night, trying to discern a bit of DNA or mRNA or a grab bag of other acronyms. In reality, white-gloved investigating is a thing of the past. You could write a book about the downfall of science in criminal investigations. Someone probably has. I haven't read it, but I have a feeling it would start something like this. Once upon a time, criminal investigation was like math. You swept the scene for biological evidence, narrowed it down according to the time frame when the crime was committed, plugged the results into a database. 1 and 1 is 2. There's your man. But at some point, about 30 or 40 years ago, a trend emerged in medical research, a transition from mechanical and cybernetic prosthetics for amputees to lab-grown, fully grafted biological replacements. The method was already well established in the growth of internal organs, but using the same techniques to grow flawless new skin, muscles, limbs, digits, and eyes was revolutionary. But every output needs an input, and the process often involved borrowing organic matter from one or several donors. Over time, crime scenes started to become a bit more complicated. It wasn't uncommon to find the DNA of 5 or 6 people at a crime scene, all present within the time frame of a murder. Cops thought they were dealing with multiple perpetrators and were led around in circles, tracking down and occasionally roughing up false leads who would turn out to be donors of genetic material used for some scumbag's lab-grown teeth or something. The first major outcry came from a news story that broke about an ongoing police manhunt. The suspect had been at large for 6 months. His DNA and fingerprints had been found in the middle of a nasty murder scene. Something like 2 million credits of taxpayer money had been spent on the investigation before a simple public record search revealed that the suspect thought to be at large had been dead for 10 years. Turned out, he had donated his body to public health, and his biological material had hung in deep freeze in a genetics lab for a decade after he died. Said material was subsequently used to grow a new hand for a guy who'd lost his in a work-related accident, and then used his shiny new hand to kill a neighbor who'd been sleeping with his wife. Later, it was determined that the real killer's work-related accident had been a calculated act. This guy had altered his insurance plan to specify biological limb replacements only, in the event that such a procedure should ever become necessary, even though it would cost him a bundle extra. Then, a month later, he fed his own hand to an industrial metalworking planer. All this to plant false evidence at the scene of a premeditated murder. It was innovative. You gotta give him that. This man had a clear motive, opportunity, and no alibi. Yet he managed to get away with murder, overlooked by investigators who were too busy feeding data into computers to use their heads. The guy was gone and totally off the grid by the time the police realized their mistake. He was never caught. A prime example from that era is the rug ruse, when an elderly man with no past arrests, no history of violence, a back problem, and a heart condition was convicted and sentenced to death for the brutal slaying of 4 teenagers during an apparent drug deal gone wrong. The evidence against the old man was a DNA match to a handful of hair found in one of the dead boy's hands, clearly torn from the killer's head. But the whole thing was turned upside down when an investigative journalist, of all people, uncovered the truth. The story goes that the barber of the convicted old man also happened to offer genetic hair restoration as one of the more upscale services in his shop. His business partner, his son, was a researcher in medical genetics at the University of Black Sparrow Technical Institute. Their hair restoration therapy made them a little money on the side, and there was nothing technically illegal about what they were doing. For years, their source material came from one cheap, seemingly harmless, and basically endless supply. Each time the barber finished a cut, he simply cleaned out his comb over a basket in the corner. At the end of the week, the basket would be full of hair, not cut hair, but hair he had combed from the heads of his clientele. Hairs shed during combing commonly had the roots still attached, and hair follicles are a rich source of biological material, including DNA. Unfortunately, the poor old man who got the book thrown at him for quadruple homicide never knew any of this. His name wasn't cleared until it was too late. He died on death row while awaiting his fate, ruined and disgraced, never knowing that his hair was growing in the scalp of a killer, and a rather vain killer at that. The historic interplanetary headlines read, "Science over logic. Court posthumously overturns decision against innocent man dead and defamed by rug ruse." It wasn't the first false conviction to be overturned under such circumstances, but it was the first time the issue was brought into the spotlight, igniting public ire and inciting a general loss of confidence in investigative police work. Soon, organized crime dipped their ladles into the stew. Syndicates like the Blue Wreath started constructing false evidence for similar frame-ups, and suddenly, all manner of suspicious crimes were being committed, peppered with biological evidence from suspects with no motive, sometimes not even opportunity. All this might lead one to believe that new laws and standards of practice would be mandated for the growth of biological material. But the limitless wealth of the medical and consumer genetics industry, plus increasing distrust and disdain for law enforcement, led the tide to turn the opposite direction, against the police. The wrongful conviction scandals spearheaded rounds of harsh legislation against the use of DNA and other biological evidence in court cases, which became increasingly strict over the years. Nearly every form of biological material is no longer admissible in court. Even if it was, it would only make things more complicated. It's easier to fake DNA than to fake a cold. While there is no legislation barring the use of DNA in police investigations, it is very illegal to bring a case against anyone based solely on genetic biological material, to say nothing of simply being misguided. Old school cops, specialists clinging to tradition, still use biological material to find leads, but these days, Mild variants of genetic alteration and implantation are used in everything from beauty products to dental hygiene to fitness and body decoration, even pet care. Finding reliable biological evidence involves sifting through so much junk material that it's really more trouble than it's worth. The results of all this was a great backward leap in the field of police investigation. A new breed of detective, really an old breed reborn, rose to the occasion. The modern investigator uses logic, deduction, and hard-nosed field work to track down his man. Reason, motive, hard physical evidence. Anything less is nothing. My grandfather worked in white gloves, but my father was part of that transitional generation. He relearned the old ways, worked in street clothes, wore down the soles of his shoes tracking leads, bloodied his knuckles on anything that got in his way. As for me, as my taxi hovers down to street level and I step out onto 105th East Amber, I'm not wearing any white gloves, and I am sure as hell not here to dust for fingerprints. 6. Several Amber PD cruisers with lights off are parked outside the factory. The rain is pouring down, and I arrive just in time to see a big, white car with the words Amber Morgue on it lift off and hover into the night sky. They've loaded up the body and taken it away. I quietly curse Fox and his drink, and myself. But Harlan told me the cops had agreed to hold the body until I arrived. Must have gotten impatient. Now, I've missed my chance to see the body. Maybe they'll let me in at the morgue. The approach of my tall, broad-shouldered frame, half concealed by shadow and rain, has a few of the nearby officers getting nervous. I take my hands out of my coat pockets and let them hang at my sides. It always makes a cop feel better when he can see hands. The nearest one, a little guy, adjusts his cap by the brim and clears his throat. "Help you?" "Jack Tarelli," I say. "Rutherford Harland sent me down to have a look at the body." His relief is almost comical. He extends his hand. "Wilmer O'Hara, homicide," he says. I shake his hand gently. Don't want to hurt the little guy. "My partner Albright's the one you want," he says. "Go on in." I pass Wilmer and his associates and walk through the open door of the factory's freight entrance. Inside, I'm given only a partial reprieve from the rain. The place is falling apart, with holes busted through the ceiling so big that the rainwater comes in like a trickle in some places and like a waterfall in others. Nearby, some of the standing water swirls down a storm drain. The rest sits in deep puddles. I try to pick my way through without getting too wet, but end up splashing up to my ankles in a few places. Can't imagine a man of Nathan Harlan's status ever thought he'd meet his maker in a place like this. Lighting units have been set up to illuminate the scene, and a few cops are still snapping images. Center stage is a blood-splattered mess. No body, of course. A big plainclothes cop stands nearby puffing on a cigarette. He's middle-aged, with a high and tight haircut speckled with gray. He's taken off his jacket, leaving his chest holster exposed. He looks sour already, but at my approach, he positively pickles. "Press found us already," the big guy growls. He's in charge. Gotta be Albright. "Get this inbred out of here." "Albright, I take it," I say. I'm the P.I. Rutherford Harlan sent down to look at the body. I take an exaggerated look at the blood-stained floor behind him where the body used to be. Looks like we've got a second mystery on our hands. "Rutherford wants his own man on the case, that's fine," Albright says. "But I can't wait around all night for some freelancer to come play detective." "You were told to hold the body until Harlan's men got a look at it," I say. After one last drag, Albright tosses a cigarette over his shoulder. It lands in the water with a hiss. He makes no attempt to avoid the puddles as he closes the gap between us, never breaking eye contact with me. He's a big guy. Almost as big as me. Almost. "This is not a night to test me," he says. I know how you think this works. You act tough enough with me, and we'll bend, right? 'Cause that's what you do when a jealous husband pays you 50 creds to tail his wife down to a motel in a shady part of town. Well, nobody bends around here, pal. They only break. This is where real work happens. Real detectives. Real stakes. Turn around and go home, and maybe I won't have my boys rough you up for disrupting a police investigation. Got that, old man? The bored sort of way he says it, like he's giving directions to a lost motorist, gives me no doubt he isn't bluffing. And I remember how we used to do that. Boy, do I. But instead of backing off, I step forward, closer, slowly, and look down at him. We'd be nose to nose if he were a couple inches taller. I widen my shoulders, flex my traps so my coat lifts up, making me look even bigger. Then I lower my voice to a rumble. If you or your boys take a run at this old man, you're liable to take that body's place. You got that, Junior? Albright doesn't retreat, to his credit. He just stares up at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the other cops watching us. Finally, Albright grins, chuckles. He steps past me, not backward, which is important, and takes out a pack of cigarettes. He lights up another one, puffs casually. John Luke Albright, he says, sighing out smoke and rubbing his temples. Whatever you're going to do, get it over with so we can all get the hell out of here. Jack Tarelli, I say. May I? He waves a dismissive hand toward the floor. I take the cue and kneel down to take a look. This part of the floor is higher ground. Unlike most of the factory, it's relatively dry. Congealed blood coats the concrete nearly half an inch thick in some places. Thinner streaks run out along the perimeter. There's no sign of footprints in the blood, which strikes me as strange. Any leads on who called in the tip? I ask. Who told you about that? Asks Albright. You, just now, I say. Albright actually chuckles again. Ass, he says. Yes, it was an anonymous tip. Caller said Nathan Harlan would be found dead at this address. 10 to 1 odds the caller was the killer, I say. No way to know yet, Albright says. Body probably wouldn't have been found for a long time otherwise. Nobody around here but bums and junkies. The whole district is a ghost town. They should just blast it. Clear-cut murder? I ask. Better believe it, he says. Whoever did it wanted him to suffer. Shot 6 times. Both knees, both elbows, both eyes. I'm guessing in that order. That explains all the blood, I say. Major arteries, plus shock value with the limbs. Then overkill with the eyes. A bad way to die. Overkill is right. Nearly blew the top of his head off. The top? I take my hat off, scratch my bare head, a bit envious of Albright's gray-speckled dark hair. Nice and thick. Mine hasn't looked like that since I was 25. Any weapons recovered? None. Harlan wasn't armed either. He must not have come expecting a fight. What makes you say that? I ask. For one, he wasn't carrying so much as a pocket knife. No, I mean, what makes you think he came here? You're assuming he was here of his own will. Don't assume anything. Albright bristles a little at that remark. Probably he remembers who he's talking to. A PI, a gumshoe, a Seamus. The lowest of the low in the opinion of a commissioned detective. I know. I've been on both sides. Was he robbed? I asked. Albright grabs something from a nearby cop and hands it to me. It's an evidence bag. I take it carefully, holding it up to the lights to look through its transparent skin. Inside is a gold watch with a crystal face, probably worth more than Albright's salary, and a blood-stained leather wallet. Anything in the wallet? I ask, knowing better than to try looking for myself. That would ruin my welcome real fast. ID, about 1,000 credits and bills, some bank cards, and a couple data chips worth who knows how much. I hand the bag back to Albright. A lot of money in there. Even if the motive wasn't financial, who wouldn't take this stuff? Was the killer too worked up at the time to be thinking clearly? Or somebody who doesn't need money? You got pictures of the body? I ask. No can do, says Albright. I don't want to take them anywhere, just have a look. Albright growls in annoyance. It looks like his cigarette's about to split between his teeth. Then you're gone? He says. Then I'm gone. He gestures to one of the nearby officers, who is quick to comply. He brings over a datapad, which he keeps firmly in his grasp, but he allows me to look at each picture for a moment as he scrolls through. I see various angles of the somewhat portly body of Nathan Harland lying face up on the factory floor with dark, ragged wounds. Due to the gunshot wounds to his knees and elbows, his lower legs and forearms lie at strange angles. His mouth hangs open a little like he's watching a bad movie, but where his eyes should be are only 2 coin-sized holes. I can see no other noticeable injuries except for some discoloration around his neck. The officer scrolls past another picture, but I reach up and quickly scroll back. Nathan Harland from the neck up. Albright, I say. The exit's on the head, near the top of the cranium? Yeah. Looks like almost a 45-degree angle, upward. The coroner will tell us, Albright says. He takes the datapad away and nods to the other officers. Let's pack up, boys. I give the crime scene a final glance and turn to leave, but Albright grabs the shoulder of my coat. I turn back. I do not want to see you again tonight, he says. Feelings mutual, I say. I mean it. Stay out of our way, or there'll be trouble. Let me give you some friendly advice. What? I lean in close so that only he can hear me. Get your hand off me, or I will break your damn fingers. All of them. He tightens his grip. Then I'll arrest you for assaulting an officer. With broken fingers, you will. Albright lets go. I leave. 7. Exiting the factory, I pull up my collar and adjust my hat against the cold rain. I weave through the cops standing guard, leaving them and their patrol cars behind and walking down the street. I'll hail a cab in a minute. Sometimes a walk in the rain does the mind good. Even though I managed to peek at those pictures, I can't help but wonder how much more I could have learned from a first-hand look at the body. Albright wasn't just in a hurry. He clearly meant to send a message by having it taken away before I got there. To show me he wasn't going to be pushed around. I'm just grateful I was able to learn as much as I did. First impressions, something strange is going on. In any homicide investigation, you're generally dealing with one of, or some combination of, 3 options: blades, firearms, and particle beam weapons. Standard pistols, rifles, and shotgun firearms are the most common choice among Amber City killers. Firearm is a misnomer. Classic firearms used a spark and flammable powder to create a miniature explosion, propelling a projectile, like a metal bullet, down the length of a gun barrel. Modern firearms, however, use synthetic bullets launched by means of artificial acceleration. The same tech used in the anti-gravity boosters of automobiles and airships is used to accelerate the slug down the barrel. Rather than the potential energy contained in a shell full of powder, the energy processes are initiated by the weapon itself with a rechargeable power pack. The result is the same, but ballistics is now a science of physics, not chemistry. Anti-grav accelerated bullets are affectionately nicknamed axe slugs. And rather than the explosive bang produced by firearms of yore, the discharge of a power pack is like a whisper, making axe slug weapons as quiet as they are deadly. A smaller percentage of crimes involve particle beam weaponry. Particle beam weapons are deadlier than axe slug firearms, but thanks to a higher price tag, fewer make it to the streets. Particle rifles and particle pistols emit charged particles in the form of a concentrated, short-burst beam. These blasts are capable of burning through flesh, bone, and nearly anything else. Where a bullet can rip, tear, and destroy, a particle beam will burn and disintegrate matter in its path. They work best at medium range. Beyond that, the beam will bloom, spreading out and diffusing into a less harmful cone of light, then fading away altogether. While these weapons might seem unstoppable, the modern personal magnetic force field, a scaled-down version of the tech used by starship shields, was designed specifically to defend against particle beams. If properly calibrated, a personal force field covers a person's body like a second skin and can defend against a full power pack's worth of point-blank blasts from a particle pistol before needing to be recharged. In this case, the lack of burns rules out particle beams. No need to scan for radiation. Nathan Harlan's knees and elbows were all but destroyed, leaving me to believe that the killer used either an axe-slug shotgun or a handgun at very close range. This was not a dispute that got hot or a stick-up gone wrong. Nathan Harlan was killed with calculated, carefully chosen shots. Nathan Harlan was not murdered. He was executed. Content with my walk in the rain, I wave my hand over a nearby signal pylon. It illuminates with white light, and within seconds, a set of headlamps breaks off from the zigzagging traffic lanes high above to come whizzing down in my direction. Typically, the next step in the investigation would be to case the neighborhood, ask a lot of questions, search around, that sort of thing. Like Albright said, there's no one around here but vagrants and drug addicts, but they can be valuable sources of information. Now's not the time, though, because 4 big men in trench coats have been following me since I left the factory, and they're getting closer. I don't think they're cops, and I don't know what their game is, but I'm not sticking around to find out. Against 1, maybe even 2, I might try my luck, but 4-1, unfair odds for any man. As the cab lowers to a hover beside me, I hazard a glance over my shoulder just in time to see them take a seemingly casual turn down an adjoining alley. I step into the cab and shut the door, and we take off. Take her down a couple blocks, then circle back, I tell the driver. Nice and slow. When we come back around, I press my nose against the glass, trying to see down into the street below. The signal pylon is dark. They didn't hail a cab to follow me. That's about as much precaution as I can take, so I give the driver an address a couple streets down from home, and he redirects the cab toward the other end of town for some much-needed sleep. I wish I was still young enough to pull all-nighters, but a guy needs his rest.